interview with Dr. Ted Fogarty. And we're live on the internet and ready for recording in 3, 2. Good afternoon. This is Mckoy here on AM 660 and FM 106.7 in Lincoln and all around the world, which right now we are live on KCRO.com as well as several other social media platforms. The reason we're doing this today is because a senator from the state of Nebraska brought this that I've known for a while, brought this young man to me, and he's got a story that he thinks needs to get put out. So the old journalist in me came out, and I've asked Dr. Ted to be a part of this webcast and broadcast. And so for those of you sitting and watching this on your Facebook or Twitter or YouTube or whatever it is, you might want to call some friends and have them tune in. And if they have none of those social medias, then just have them, let them come on your Facebook and see it. All right. Dr. Edward Fogarty, I'm going to call you Dr. Ted. You said that was all right.
Correct, Mac. Thank you.
All right. And you are a radiologist, a hyperbaric medicine. That's where you practice.
Well, I am technically probably one of the greatest breadths of practice in all of America in terms of doing emergency radiology at night and teleradiology, and then during the day doing interventional pain management radiology work and dealing with patients, as well as using hyperbaric chambers in a pain management program. And I happen to, in the great state of Nebraska, discover how to reverse dementia.
Wow.
With air chamber hyperbarics.
Yeah. All right. And I want to talk about that. You have a clinic in Okoboji called Fogarty Meyer, and we'll discuss your partner also in this.
Yeah.
And again, Senator John Jacobson from the great state of Iowa. He has represented the legislature there in Iowa for many terms.
Now, Mac, you did encourage me to correct you. So, John is going to be running for the Senate in Iowa. In the next cycle, probably in 2024, for the new district, Senate District number 8. And he was kind of malignantly redistricted out of the House. The Iowa House redistricted his former District 22 in Potawatomi County and kind of gerrymandered it into 5 different zones to make sure that he wasn't going to be able to win this election cycle.
Yeah, exactly. And no apology necessary. Thank you for correcting that. I knew that, but I didn't know it could be let out yet. So thank you for letting us know. You may be the first person that said that publicly.
Well,
I don't know.
I think since John's last day and last week in the Iowa House of Representatives was just finished this week, I think it's probably okay with him that I'm the medical behind the scenes leak on that information.
All right. And where did you go to school?
So I grew up here in Omaha.
In Omaha, okay.
My namesake, Edward F. Fogarty Sr., was the city attorney in the 40s and 50s who wrote the Omaha City Charter, which is those are the laws that govern the city of Omaha.
Yeah.
And the Cathedral Parish is where my family and multiple extended family relatives have been. And so I went to St. Cecilia's for grade school, and then went to Omaha Creighton Prep for a couple years, and then there's some political stuff there that kind of irritated me as a young, politically astute high school student, and so I decided to transfer to Omaha Central. I played football for the great coach William Reed, who was the first African-American football coach in Nebraska
Absolutely.
high school history. And then I went off to the University of Chicago and played football there, which the University of Chicago has more Nobel Prize winners in the history of the Nobel laureates. And so really attracted to that place for it's kind of like the Marine Corps of academia.
Well, that's awesome. You've educated yourself quite well.
Right. And, actually the whole Ricketts family, all of the siblings of former Governor Pete Ricketts, they all went to the University of Chicago as well.
Soon to be Senator Ricketts.
And yes, and in a small world kind of thing, my father, Edward F. Fogarty Jr., who's been an attorney in Omaha for 50 years and retired basically in 2020, he and Pete Ricketts' dad are classmates from Creighton in the same year, and they've led some retreats, silent retreats together out
awesome.
At the Catholic Retreat Center on the banks of the Platte River.
Wow. Yeah, that's a great place. Been there. All right. So we are not here to do a bio on you, but I did want people to understand who you are and where you're coming from.
Well, we haven't gotten to any of the medical part.
I know. Oh, you mean in your education?
Yeah.
All right.
So
go ahead.
I went to med school at UNMC here in Omaha.
Yep.
Did a very important transitional year in Fargo, North Dakota, an internship of sorts in Fargo, North Dakota with the UND system, and then came back to residency at Creighton at the old St. Joe's Hospital before they moved it to Bergen. And so I was basically trained in the neighborhood I grew up in. And then I got a call from a Creighton trained radiologist up in Bismarck, North Dakota, and decided to take my first job in radiology in the great state capital of North Dakota.
Yeah.
Bismarck.
All right. Good. Okay. So if I were to hang a slide or a sign on this radio program and it said breaking news.
Yeah.
And you have to be able to write it on the back of a business card. It's got to be that short.
Okay.
What would that say about what we're going to talk about?
It would say, search the terms hyperbaric Eden Fogarty.
Eden?
Eden.
E-D-A-N.
Eden as in the Garden of Eden, E-D-E-N.
Okay, E-N.
And there's breaking news from, it's actually the most reported on miracle case report probably in history that came out in the summer of 2017, where Dr. Harch, Paul G. Harch at LSU, and I, as the chair of radiology at the University of North Dakota, we reported this miracle recovery of a youngster, 3-year-old at the time, named Eden Carlson, who had she was basically in a persistent vegetative state after leaving Arkansas Children's Hospital after a near drowning accident, and we rebuilt her brain through hyperbaric air pressure concepts.
That's incredible. I'd like to talk to her one day. We're also going to talk a little bit about the fact that you believe and you have medical proof. Now, remember to stop me if I say something wrong. Medical proof that the vaccines that so many of us have taken, I've had 4, never had COVID, but the vaccines that I've taken for COVID are starting cancer up in former cancer patients, and people are dying right and left.
Yes, this is basically a practice of medicine, observation, and understanding of the real scientific concepts here. Goes into how we understand mitochondrial medicine. My practice of innovation in science and medicine is really foundationally based on mitochondrial medicine techniques and concepts. Right. And that's a foreign term to everybody listening, even in the world of medicine today, because we have all been taught in formal medicine to look at the body from the organ level standpoint.
Okay.
And I, as I became chair at the University of North Dakota School of Medicine, I pioneered the use of mitochondrial imaging techniques to find breast cancer. in a technique called breast-specific gamma imaging or molecular breast imaging. And this was really kind of a foundational revelation from God to me in my practice of how we could really leverage in imaging and in diagnostics our mitochondria as a marker for cancer and disease. And so that's how this whole technique actually works in breast imaging. But so I started to become a real hardcore student of all things mitochondria, both in diagnostics and therapeutics, and that really dovetails into the hyperbaric part of my practice. But when we have, whether it's mediated by a vaccine or by a virus itself, when we have the spike protein, which I personally believe as a God-fearing Christian that this is somehow part of Revelation 13:17 and the mark of the beast system. But when we have a spike protein, whether it comes from nature or mankind.
Vaccines.
Yes. And whether it was part of a bioweapons program to even develop it, it's immaterial to me at some level. What we do know is that the spike protein has part of this protein has points in its configuration that attack the mitochondria in all of our cells. And so when the spike protein, either by viral replication mechanisms or by the mRNA biotech, not from the hand of God, leveraging of our own genomics and genetic apparatus is building spike protein inside of our cells, that process leaves a protein inside the cytosol, the part of the cell that all of the organelles float in. It leaves that protein in there, able to attack our mitochondria. And so when we have the clinical diagnosis and understanding of what people are calling long hauler syndrome, how that is really happening is that spike protein, regardless, again, vaccine versus disease, viruses, the spike protein is destroying people's mitochondria. And when it's starting to destroy 20%, 30% of the mitochondria in every cell, now every breath you take through your lungs has only 70% of the usual processing centers of oxygen combusting with glucose to produce energy. So you're literally 70%. It's like a dimmer on a light bulb at 70%. And so that's how, when you look at the long hauler COVID mechanisms of action and the mitochondrial interactions with all of this, and then you look at my innovations in the Northern Plains and in the Upper Missouri River Valley to bring in hyperbaric medicine to treat long hauler COVID. And I actually received a $50,000 grant from the North Dakota CARES Act system to come up with the protocols using hyperbaric therapy to treat long hauler as well as acute COVID. And additionally, I was commissioned to create a designer nutraceutical based on the work of Omaha Central graduate Albert B. Crum, graduated from Omaha Central in 1949, who got patented the safest supplement on planet Earth, which is the 3 amino acids that form glutathione. This was patented in Canada by Dr. Albert Crum, and the patent came down on February 19th, 2020, and it gives Dr. Crum the rights to claim that this is an antiviral supplement in Canada.
This is Mckoy. We're live on AM 660, FM 106.7 in Lincoln and all around the world, and on internet at kcro.com, Facebook, YouTube, things like that. My guest today is Dr. Edward Fogarty, and he's talking way above my head. So if you're going, what does all this mean? Well, if I understand it correctly, we are now seeing spiking cases of cancer and being able to go back and see that the immune system, your immune system, my immune system, is being attacked by the vaccines that we took, government ordered, because of COVID-19. And one of the things that Dr. Ted does is he examines they're not X-rays, but they're what?
Yeah. Emergency radiology is my practice at night across.
Oh, so they are X-rays.
Well, the majority of them are not X-rays.
Okay.
The majority of them are CT scans and ultrasounds and MRIs, and there's a minority of X-rays coming through the emergency rooms for kids who just, fell on the ice.
Right.
But the majority of what I read in my practice and multiple radiologists around the country, some of them based out of Omaha, are reading a lot of CT scans post-pandemic. A lot of people are showing up in the emergency rooms at 3 a.m. with stage 4 cancers. And pre-pandemic, I was also in this industry and reading films out of an outfit from Minnesota. And pre-pandemic, my practice in emergency radiology was 90% normal studies in the middle of the night coming through the emergency rooms. And then we would have 10% would come from the ICUs in the middle of the night, and they would be highly abnormal. Okay. Now we're seeing a selection bias in the emergency rooms where people are coming into the emergency rooms all across the country in the middle of the night because, first of all, they've been kind of scared off from going to the hospitals. There's a lot of people who don't want to go to the hospitals and be berated about how they're not vaccinated anyway. But the people who have been vaccinated multiple times and are going back into the system and having, abdominal pain, chest pain, and these other things, there's a significant increase in the number of highly abnormal CTs that I'm reading every night across America, and all of my colleagues in emergency radiology are also reading these things. And we've all been talking about, look at how this has all changed our practices. Basically, starting in January of 2021, we started to see this uptick in people coming in through emergency rooms with these very complex reads that we have to do on stage 4 cancer presenting to the emergency room. So if you look at it as a class of people and as a professional society of emergency radiology, I can tell you from my practice, I went from 90% normal, easy to read, fast, high productivity radiology to closer to 90% abnormal.
Completely flip.
Yes. And half of those are some of the strangest things I've ever seen in medicine, but also I'm seeing a high percentage of fetuses at between 10 and 12 weeks who are dying in the womb, and they show up on the ultrasounds, and you can see a 10 week, 12 week fetus right there in the uterus that has basically spontaneously aborted. And these vaccines, if you were to do a study of these current mRNA vaccines and study it against RU486, the efficacy of as an abortifacient of what these vaccines are is probably equivalent to RU486, or maybe even better.
Which is the immediate abortion pill.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, you're hearing this, and it's the real thing, and that's why I'm doing this at a time other than my regular live time, and why we're doing it on social media on several platforms, because basically what Dr. Ted Fogarty is explaining here is that those of us, and I'm one of them, 4 vaccines I had, those of us that had those vaccines are now coming up with stage 4 cancer and other ailments, babies dying in the womb of, I'm assuming, mothers who then had the vaccines, when we were told this is completely safe. All right, I'm going to take a break. We're going to come back, and we're going to talk about this some more. Call your friends. This is something worth watching and listening live on social media, on Facebook, on YouTube. Just find it, man. You need to hear this. We're coming back on AM 660, FM 106.7 in Lincoln, and all around the world at kcro.com. 3, 2. Welcome back to the Talk of the Heartland here on the View From A Pew. I'm Mckoy, your host, and we are broadcasting live right now on the internet with cameras, by the way, on several platforms. My Facebook, KCRO's Facebook page. You don't need to be welcomed or have a friend or be a friend there, you can just watch this. It's also live on YouTube. If you go to youtube.com and search Mac, M-A-C like macaroni, Mac McKoy, M-C-K-O-Y. All right, so when COVID-19 came down, there was this incredible rush by everybody in the world, especially here in America, to create these vaccines. And one of the things you talked about when we were talking earlier is, how long does it usually take to create a vaccine, and how long did it take to get the ones that we got, I don't know when it was, summer of 20, or spring of 21?
Well, from an industry understanding, that's a bit of a different discussion, but in the pediatric vaccine series and tetanus and the kind of the standard routine vaccines, they take about 5 years to really develop and test for safety. Of course, there's been an outlier in the whole vaccine system that has gone on for years that is actually an unethical experiment every year, and that's the influenza shots. Every year are a brand new concoction that have never been tested for safety. And so when there's biological mimicry going in to some of these new antigens that are coming out of the flu shots for decades. There was a series in the I forget the numbers, but the one of the swine flu versions of H1N5. Really, there was a spike in people who developed kind of a polysomnia and sleeping sickness kind of issue there. And from the industry, it's a very dirty industry. Let me just tell you, because
when you say dirty, you mean
it's dirty in a whole lot of ways. First of all, the United States federal government in 1986 allowed the vaccine industry to continue to exist without any oversight from the American attorneys, because they can never be sued for a vaccine injury. And the reason why this came about in 1986 was because a whole bunch of American attorneys were winning huge awards against the vaccine companies for pertussis vaccines, whole pertussis vaccine. Okay, so when we were developing vaccines for pertussis in the 70s and the early 80s, there was a whole pertussis version, and that concoction was causing seizures and death in our youngest Americans. And there were attorneys who were winning multi-million-dollar judgments against the manufacturers of the pertussis vaccines, and this all came under national security auspices that we have to protect these companies in order to maintain a vaccine program.
I see.
If we ever have a bioweapon coming along down the line, which it now appears we have.
And hold on.
And so no American family starting in 1986 could ever sue a vaccine industry company for a vaccine related death or a vaccine related seizure disorder that ended up creating cognitive slowing in your child. And my father, actually, Edward F. Fogarty Jr., he's been a malpractice attorney and has had some huge cases in getting
right here in Omaha
justice for people who have been harmed by big corporations.
All right,
and yet in this one area of medicine, in this one area of American industry and commerce, there's not a single pharmaceutical vaccine associated company that can ever be sued for anything ever. And imagine if we allowed that for all other industries.
Dr. Edward Fogarty is my guest. He is a radiologist. He practices hyperbaric medicine. And Senator John Jacobson from the great state of Iowa.
Representative.
Future senator. Well, I don't want to get into politics here. From Iowa brought this gentleman to me, and we're bringing what I believe is breaking news. I believe this is extremely important for everybody to hear, and it's being recorded, and it will be available for you to watch or listen to every chance you get to different places on the internet, including youtube.com, and then search Mac, M-A-C, last name M-C-K-O-Y.
Mac, I just want to warn you, as an American physician who on Facebook, starting at the beginning of the pandemic, My research partner, Dr. Paul G. Harch, at LSU, he translated the Wuhan hyperbaric experience, and it was phenomenal. In Wuhan,
China, where they think this came from.
Yes, in Wuhan, China, in November and December, these Chinese physicians, yes, are taking their worst of their worst cases and putting them in hyperbaric oxygen tanks at 1.6 atmospheres of 100% oxygen, which we have a whole suite of those at UNMC here in town. And I think there's a couple at Bergen Mercy Hospital as well, affiliated with the Creighton Radiology Program, which is where I trained. And so Dr. Harch got together across Chinese and American medical lines and translated the Wuhan experience for our whole English-speaking world to understand how the Chinese had already figured out the protocols to save tons of lives with hyperbaric oxygen therapy in the midst of this early pandemic experience. And then NYU out in New York by May of 2020 had replicated the Wuhan experience, and they were the NYU emergency medicine doctors who came up with the hyperbaric protocols. See, hyperbarics is actually a formal subspecialty of emergency medicine. And so
I understand that now.
And so they were saving 90% of their patients when the top critical care doctors in New York City, which is literally, it's critical care extreme.
Yeah.
Like this is, and who better than the New York critical care docs to be able to take care of a pandemic, and yet here's the thing: ventilators are not oxygenators. You can only, and there's nobody in critical care medicine in this country who wants to get into a debate with me on these matters, because I will shred them up with the laws of physics as the third Edward F. Fogarty in this town, from two attorneys who did a lot of incredible legal work in this town to set up society. And so here's the thing. We can save 90% of these severe cases of COVID victims in the face of NYU medicine and all of critical care medicine in New York losing 90% of their patients in May of 2020. And I was on an AM radio station in June of 2020 telling everyone in New York City that I could about how NYU has already pioneered how to save hundreds of thousands of lives if we, instead of having New York Governor Cuomo begging for 50,000 ventilators, he should have been begging for 100,000 hyperbaric chambers. And it just makes common sense. The common person can understand this. When I, as a physician, if I intubate you and I put an ET tube in your throat, and I can only increase the pressure in your lungs by about 3% before I'm going to blow out your lung and give you a collapsed lung.
Yeah.
When I gently put you in an elegant situation without intubating you into a chamber where we're flooding the whole chamber with 100% oxygen, and we're doubling the pressure. So now we're packing the gas molecules together 2 to 1. Every time you take a breath in that environment, you're getting twice as much oxygen into your whole body. And oxygen, just like all other gases, doesn't have to respect boundaries. You can get oxygen into your cells everywhere without your red blood cells. This was all proven in the 1960s in multiple studies with dogs, and all of our divers in the U.S. Navy and everybody in the whole diving medicine world knows when you saturate the body with 10 times as much oxygen as what we're taking in right now at 1 atmosphere and breathing 20% oxygen, it goes everywhere, and it's now deployable without the use of red blood cells to rev up those mitochondrial engines.
Immune systems.
To rev up the immune system. The immune system, actually, per gram of quote-unquote tissue, the immune system is using more oxygen than any other organ in the body, actually, when you're in an infectious crisis.
All right. Dr. Edward Fogarty is my guest. He believes, through all of his medical research and work, that the vaccines that I took, maybe you took because the government told us to, because of COVID-19, may be causing stage 3, stage 4 cancer in you and I. and it is also impacting pregnant women who have had the vaccines, and many of the babies are dying in the womb. We're going to come back. We're not done with this one yet, so thanks for listening to KCRO. 3, 2. Welcome back for those of you listening to this live or watching this live on social media right now. Please excuse my radioisms when I have to give the call letters and say those type of things, although this radio station has been so supportive in allowing us to get this information out. Legislator John Jacobson from the state of Iowa, who is getting ready to run for senator, brought Dr. Fogarty to me so we could tell everybody that Fauci was wrong.
Fauci,
excuse me. Fauci's a joke among a couple friends of mine. Fauci was wrong, and the government was wrong. And this is a trained doctor. He's a radiologist in hyperbaric medicine.
Academic. I'm the academic maverick from the Upper Missouri Valley that has actually I've taught a whole bunch of medical students who are now practicing physicians all the way from Bismarck down to Omaha.
Yeah.
And so from an academically credible standpoint, I want to inform the listeners that, and I love to teach over the airwaves. This is my favorite thing to do, is to teach American citizens how to find the most credible scientific information on PubMed regarding some of these matters. And so if listeners can go to PubMed, our scientific database of medicine and all things research.
PubMed is P-U-B, or is that short for public?
PubMed.com. .org. It's going to be
.org. All right.
It's a it's or .edu. I can't even remember. But just type in PubMed.
Yeah, Google it.
Science, and then get to our National Library of Medicine's website, and within the PubMed search engine, if you type in Fauci, and then the letters as an acronym, N-A-C. NAC and Fauci. It will pull up two reports from 1991 and 1992 where Tony Fauci himself had discovered the antidote to all viral RNA species. And this is how this all works. All of these RNA viruses are predicated on one common Achilles heel of reverse transcriptase. And the reverse transcriptase gene in all RNA viruses, whether it's Zika virus, whether it's coronavirus, whether it's Ebola, whether it's influenza, all of these RNA viruses, they use reverse transcriptase to make more copies of themselves. These viruses were shown by Tony Fauci himself in an HIV model to be shut down in their ability to replicate when you have high glutathione levels inside the cell.
Yeah, and for those of you watching and listening to this, I don't understand half of what he's saying either. But the reason I like him talking about this in the way that he is it's not a soundbite. It's not something you can say or make human in a soundbite. You need all this information. So if you don't understand some of the things he's saying, I'm right with you. But that's why we're recording this. You can send it to doctors. You can send it to radiologists. Send it to whoever you want. And have a nice, good, intelligent conversation, and you'll find that what Dr. Fogarty is saying is true. Now,
right. So for a quick soundbite,
go ahead. Sorry.
For a quick soundbite, if you go to thepurplepowder.com, you will find the North Dakota CARES Act Innovation Super Nutraceutical program that I put together with my partner Brad Meyer in manufacturing and producing within our practice of medicine in Northwest Iowa this powder that contains the amino acid precursors of glutathione as well as spirulina and beetroot powder. And those things we can discuss on another portion of the show or later on in the month. But Tony Fauci's observation, this is how Tony Fauci directly translates to Ted Fogarty, and it's Fauci versus Fogarty here now. So Tony Fauci proves that we can use an amino acid precursor of glutathione, cysteine, to stop viral replications intracellularly in the 1990s. And then I'm going full circle with Dr. Albert Crum from Omaha Central Hall of Fame, and he is in the Omaha Central Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
As a physician scientist already. Yeah. And Dr. Crum taught me how all of this works on the glutathione side of things. And so when you give people amino acid precursors of glutathione, such as are in the purple powder, and their body takes it in, it's increasing the glutathione levels inside the cell,
the immune system,
and that's shutting down the viral replication cycle. Now, we use this in medicine. In my specialty, in my emergency medicine colleagues' specialty, and pulmonologists, and one of the greats of Omaha, Nebraska, is former pulmonologist and hyperbaric physician. I call him the godfather of hyperbarics in Nebraska, Dr. Mckoy, Lon Keim. He started the hyperbaric program at Clarkson, which then got enveloped into UNMC through Nebraska Medicine, and Dr. Keim and I have been weekly talking about this whole pandemic at the start of this whole thing, and working on observations and how do we get our colleagues to look at some of these issues in terms of the hyperbarics as well as even the glutathione issues. Now And so Dr. Keim, as a pulmonologist, has for 50 years saved children's lungs with cystic fibrosis with NAC, or the trade name is Mucomist. Okay, so my emergency medicine colleagues, even in Omaha, are nightly during the worst depths of the pandemic, they're saving people's lives who are despaired, and they're trying to kill themselves on Tylenol overdosing. We have to run a ton of IV NAC Mucomist into a human being's body after they've had a Tylenol overdose to rescue the liver, because Tylenol is a glutathione depleting agent. And then in my practice, and I've done this across state lines, and I've taught this to many North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota, Iowa, and Nebraska practicing radiologists who were my students in North Dakota. I've always told them, if you have somebody who's just come out of the cath lab and the cardiologist had to use a lot of extra contrast, and we need to do a CT for other purposes, maybe they've got a bowel obstruction and we still need to use a little contrast, what we can do is we can pre-treat the kidneys, save the kidneys by giving them a boost of glutathione through IV NAC, helps protect the kidneys. And so I've, in my practice, been using this for years. And so when Dr. Meyer and I, we started saving lives in Northwest Iowa at Lakes Region Hospital, which is an Avera-controlled hospital. The South Dakotans basically are telling these Northwest Iowa physicians how to practice medicine. And I taught from out of North Dakota, I taught Dr. Meyer how to use IV NAC to save lives in his hospital in Dickinson County, Iowa.
All right. Now, I want to, and I so much appreciate your long form of explaining this, because that's the right way to do it, rather than trying to grab headlines and sound bites. But what I hear you saying is that the vaccines that so many of us took because Dr. Fauci told us we needed to save our lives, the government made them available to us, and if you were in the Army or a police department or MET or something like that, EMT, excuse me, you could lose your job if you didn't take these. Now what these doctors are discovering right here in Omaha, in Fargo, in Okoboji, all these doctors that are working on this, they're finding that these vaccines are raising the level of cancer in many, many patients, 9 out of 10, into stage 3 and stage 4 cancer. That's what this is all about.
Yeah.
Now, let me ask you a question.
Do you want me to go through how that all works?
Sure, but okay. I want to ask you a question just first. Then we got to take a break, and then we'll come back, and then I want you to tell me that.
The natural killer cells.
Natural killer cells.
That's our soundbite.
That's what the vaccine is.
No.
Oh.
But go back to where you were going first.
All right. My question to you very quickly is, should we be calling our doctors? Should we be checking into the hospital? Should we call our doctors and get them to an oncologist as soon as we can?
The majority of physicians in this great state in Iowa and around the Northern Plains, they are unwitting participants in a murderous and treasonous racketeering scheme that Tony Fauci has set up.
Is that where this lawsuit's coming from that you just talked about, Fogarty versus Fauci?
Yeah, there are a number of angles by which I am working through other entities and enterprises to basically stop what Tony Fauci has brought into our great nation as a racketeering scheme to destroy the health of Americans.
All right.
And I'm doing that on the ground in various legislatures in the Northern Plains.
So we're working on this, but it's time that you heard about it. And simply said, oops, maybe the people that chose not to take the vaccines, and I was not one of them. I chose to take them, 4 of them. The people who didn't take the vaccines may be the smartest people in the room.
So, Mac, the purple powder, which I created to actually treat spike protein-mediated disease on a federal grant, the best $50,000 that the U.S. federal government spent on this pandemic was for my federal grant through the North Dakota Ag Commissioner in the CARES Act grant, which had 2 prongs, this hyperbaric protocols and the development of aircrafthbot.org concepts where we can use every jetliner on the ground in this country as a mass unit for COVID and any other pandemic now and forever. We can stop all of these pandemics on the ground now and forever by simply employing aircrafthbot.org protocols. And I can tell you as a clinical innovator and working with my physician colleagues like Dr. Lee Merritt here in Omaha and Western Iowa, like Dr. David Hartsuch, who's on the east side of Iowa, and my personal partner in Aeronautics Performance Clinic up in Okoboji, which is Dr. Bradley Meyer. We are all using various forms of amino acid precursors of glutathione, such as the purple powder. And Dr. Meyer and myself, we have documented from Sioux Falls cardiologists at Sanford University of South Dakota even, have proven to us through our patients and to themselves that this purple powder formulation can actually raise your ejection fraction out of your damaged heart after vaccination.
Oh, my gosh. All right. I want to run a disclaimer here. I wasn't told to. I work for wonderful people, and they believe in the truth. But I want to run this just to cover the radio station and those listening who are hearing this, and it's going to take a form, a shape in our national medicine here this winter. We just have no idea. So here's the disclaimer.
The comments and opinions of Talk of the Heartland with Mac Mckoy are not necessarily the opinions of Walnut Media USA, management, any particular denomination or religion, the mailman, the church lady, or anyone else of sound mind and body. Now, here's the Talk of the Heartland with Mac Mckoy on KCRO, the Heartland's Christian voice.
All right, thank you very much. That is our disclaimer to make sure you understand that the radio station is not responsible for what we say here and are not legally responsible, and just want to make sure they know that. We'll be back in 3 minutes as I continue my conversation with Dr. Edward Fogarty on maybe the proof that a lot of people have been talking about for so long, that these vaccines for COVID-19 are not what they said they were.
Mac, it's what the Fogarty.
I'm sorry, what?
It's what the Fogarty.
What the Fogarty?
In some jurisdictions, yes.
Yeah. Unbelievable. All right, we're coming back in 3, 2, 1 on KCRO. 3, 2. All right, welcome back. I'm with Dr. Edward Fogarty. He is a radiologist, and he and other physicians around the country are beginning to understand that the vaccines that we took, at least I took, for COVID-19 may be causing high levels, stage 3, stage 4 cancers in patients that took them. A little bit ago, in another conversation, you said something about, and if I'm wrong, just tell me, that you think that COVID or the vaccine could have been warfare, could have been chemical or medical warfare.
Yeah, and I think we should probably save that for a full segment and really give it its due time and possibly bring Dr. Lee Merritt, my colleague from Western Iowa and West Omaha here. Lee Merritt, actually, she was the only physician in Omaha who actually stood against the Omaha City Council trying to mandate masks at the start of this whole thing. I
remember her.
And she's been in the U.S. military. She was a practicing orthopedic surgeon in the Navy for 9-10 years, and she has truly the most powerful voice in all of this for the corruption and how it's impacting our military. We have the governor of Nebraska, the Dakotas, the Iowa governor, and a number of other governors who have recently said we need to stop the vaccine mandates for our military because why? Because it's decimating their immune system and their energy levels by decimating the mitochondria, and it's hurting our military readiness.
Now, we know that COVID came out of, what was the city? Wuhan in China, which, by the way, is interesting. Just a little tidbit for you. Without Zoom, I don't know what we would have done in business and going to church and all that. But Zoom was created about 4 miles from where the laboratory in China was. Now,
right, and it's all running on Bill Gates' computers. Think about the big tech control grid here.
Yeah. Well, tell me about that.
Well, that's a long story, but I do want to refocus us on our own internal.
Because you're coming back real soon, and I want you to bring Dr. Merrick too.
Yes, and our own internal. I love making analogies, between medicine and lay people so they can understand things. But our own internal immune system has a branch of the services of our immune system, which I would call the Navy SEALs.
Okay.
And I
like those guys.
These Navy SEALs are the natural killer cells, and they are the primary agents of looking for cancer cells floating around, trying to get into your bones and into your liver from out of your breast or your prostate or your lungs, and even on the ground and infiltrating into tissues. And they're part of this whole immunosurveillance for cancer system that God above equipped us all with. But what they run on a lot of energy. They have to use a lot of oxygen processed with glutathione to burn the glucose to get energy.
Burn the sugar to get the energy.
Through the mitochondria.
Okay. I understand that.
And so of all of our cells, these immune system cells, even the macrophages, the T cells, the B cells, they are like 12-cylinder engines in their use of oxygen.
Okay.
They per gram of tissue, these white cells are using a lot of oxygen when they're doing their work. And when you're septic and you're really sick, a lot of your oxygen is going straight into feeding these immune system cells to process the oxygen for energy, so then the immune system cells can produce antibodies, which, by the way, antibodies can't fold correctly unless you have high enough levels of glutathione, because the glutathione is actually donating a sulfur-sulfur double bond to create the three-dimensional shape of an antibody. So the genius of Dr. Crum here from Omaha Central is that he's not only proven it by citing Tony Fauci's work in the HIV model in Canada that we need these 3 amino acids for our immune system, but he's also taught me to look into this, and I did molecular genetics at the University of Chicago on structural proteins called keratins, which have a lot of sulfur-sulfur double bonds to create a scaffolding system for your skin and your hair. And these double bonds of sulfur are coming directly from glutathionylation. This is the actual scientific term, and I can tell you this. There's not probably a single doctor in all of Omaha and Council Bluffs or anywhere else that has ever heard the term glutathionylation. But it is actually one of the most important parts of structural protein folding, and directly links into how our bodies actually create antibodies. And that all takes energy as well.
Dr. Edward Fogarty is my guest today. He is a radiologist, a doctor, trained here in the Midwest, family history of lawyers and mayors and not mayors, lawyers, journalists here in Omaha. And I met him through legislator John Jacobson, who is now getting ready to run for senator in the great state of Iowa. But this has nothing to do with politics. Somebody's going to make it about politics, but this is about our lives.
Yes.
Now, if I may be so blunt for a moment, you see, medicine and abortion don't work together. But yet it's become a political hot potato because there's so much money behind it. There's so much money behind these vaccines and Dr. Fauci and all these people who required us all to get these vaccines.
You really can't be a pro-life physician in my view of this whole horrible warfare landscape. You cannot be an advocate for these COVID-19 vaccines and call yourself a pro-life physician, because they are going directly into the mitochondria of the fetus and destroying the fetal mitochondrial energy system,
which is their immune system,
which is leading to abortions. The other thing is this: the Japanese, at the start of the vaccine rollout, they took Pfizer's vaccines and they tested, where is this really going?
Yeah.
Because it's injected in your arm, and they're claiming, oh, it just goes into the bloodstream and helps the immune system cells make the spike protein. And no, it's going at a very high level. Actually, the lipid, the fatty, it's like these little fat emulsification bubbles. And people are on liposomal vitamin C, and I strongly encourage everyone to take liposomal vitamin C as anytime they can. But that whole process is when you wrap a product, either a nutrient like vitamin C or the mRNA COVID vaccine, it's a misnomer to call it a vaccine by prior art and intellectual property law. This is a biotech, completely different thing than a vaccine.
Is it a weapon?
Well, by using the term vaccine, see, the vaccine companies and this biotech rollout are allowed to come under the protection of the 1986 Act.
They can't be sued.
That they can't be sued. Now, in 1989, the federal government had a law passed that's the Anti-Terrorism Bioweapons Warfare law from the 101st Congress of our leadership in Washington, D.C., and the primary writer of that document and that law was Francis Boyle. He's an academic attorney in the law school at the University of Illinois, and he's been suppressed and censored too in all of this whole thing.
Yeah, aren't you? I don't mean to interrupt, but that's what I was going to ask you. Aren't you afraid? Don't you fear for your practice and everything like that? Putting this type of information out to the public? On the public airways, on social media?
Mac, this is a mission from God.
Okay. I get it.
Never going to fear teaching my fellow citizens how to live better. I am never going to fear that. I'm like Satchel Paige, who actually pitched in Bismarck back in the day.
Yes, he did.
I'm not looking over my shoulder because I don't care who's gaining on me. It's my duty by God to teach people how to save their lives, to teach my physician colleagues how to do medicine better.
Why aren't other people coming out with this explanation of why cancer rates and babies dying in the wombs have just skyrocketed, gone from 10% to 90% because of these vaccines? Why are we not hearing this?
Well, as a journalist and as a physician, the worst day in American history is a day that nobody even recognizes, and it's the day the Federal Communications Commission said it's okay to broadcast pharmaceuticals on U.S. airwaves.
Oh yeah.
And now our media, our fourth estate, has been slowly, incrementally, they're now the lapdog of the pharmaceutical industry in America.
The money that they...
Mac, do you know how many other countries actually allow broadcast advertising of pharmaceuticals?
No, I do not. I'm about to be told, though.
One, the lockdown queen of New Zealand, gets to have her nation state broadcast pharmaceuticals. It's just New Zealand and America.
That's it.
Nobody else allows that, because guess what? The power of the media. You know, when we look at the Tower of Babel, the modern Tower of Babel is the American media, big market, advertising, supported,
and
pharma supported loudspeaker into all of our consciousnesses to say, don't look here, we're going to kill you. Don't look here. We're going to lead you down the primrose pathway so that you pay 30% of your income into the federal government, 30% of your income into the medical system. And so our pharmaceutical companies, this is the hidden tax. Our pharmaceutical companies own the media, and the hidden tax on all of Americans' disposable income is now you're in a marketplace of the mind where you're getting distracted by all these things. So really, if you're an American citizen, and you're 60% of you're in a taxation system of 60% that I just outlined, but really your mind, your consciousness is getting filled with trash from all this media that is pharmaceutically linked and controlled, and then you go out and buy stuff because they tell you to on mainstream media, whether it's a vaccine or a pharmaceutical or the little blue pill or anything else.
Right.
And your mindscape is now, how much of your mind bandwidth is actually overtaken as linked through your income stream by other foreign entities, the U.S. federal government, the healthcare complex, the media pharmaceutical complex. I would argue that 90% of Americans' mental bandwidth is now owned, but not by them. It's now owned by someone else because they're paying all these people to nurture what they feel is important through media, through the healthcare complex, and through the federal government.
Yeah, and for those of you who want to make this sound like a conspiracy theory, I want you to think of friends of yours, maybe family members, who take medicine maybe for bipolar or for depression, or men like myself who we get older and older and it's harder to urinate, and so we take a pill that makes that happen. All these things are tied to the other things, but nobody talks about the dangers that we're in with vaccines and some of the medicines that we take. But Dr. Ted Fogarty, who is my guest today, is telling all of that. All right, I got to take a break, and we're going to come back, and we're going to talk about this right after this on KCRO. All right, we are broadcasting live here on KCRO, AM 660, 106.7 in Lincoln and all around the world at kcro.com. We're also on social medias. And I had a guest, Dr. Edward Fogarty, talk to us a little bit about how the chemical side, the medical side of the toxins that are in the shots, the vaccines that we've been taking because of COVID-19 may very well be a secret killer. It may be a weapon, a biological weapon that was developed in China. And I know you're all just shaking your head, oh, no, that's not true. That can't be true. Well, at some point, somebody's got to step out and tell you the truth. And Dr. Edward Fogarty is here to share it with us.
Yeah, and I'm just going to go back into my family line. The Fogartys are basically 3 generations of embedded journalists. And so, my uncle Tom Fogarty, Thomas Anthony Fogarty, who was a Des Moines Register political reporter and actually was at the Lincoln Star before he was interviewing Bob Kerrey when he was the governor and working with the legislature there in Lincoln, and then he moved to Des Moines, and then in the last 15 years of his life, he was at USA Today, and he was the money at the end of his life. He died unfortunately from pulmonary embolism. Linked to renal cell cancer, but near the end of his life, and as we were talking, and I was out in Washington D.C. doing at the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology, and I was virtually kind of staying with my Uncle Tommy here and there, and we would have long talks about where medicine